happening?
This is what you guys are getting today.
It's actually kind of
watch Craig shrink.
Kind of funny. This is Craig. Craig's like on his mass program, and his chair can no longer support him. And
it's working
that's
well.
Where he's at right now, yeah. All right, let me get everything situated here. All right, so we're going to be talking about a few things today. So we're going to be looking at OKRs, which, if you're not aware of what OKRs are, they are really just a problem-solving strategy. One that we've used in the past and still use quite a bit just through our own internal audits from that perspective. And kind of when we're trying to identify what moves we're going to be making based on what we're doing and based on what we're seeing. Then we're going to go through the intake process a little bit, and then through the assessment process, and not so much, again, like a specificity driven assessment, but the principles of assessment and what we think or believe that you guys should be kind of looking for from that perspective. So, we'll start with OKRs, and first and foremost, we'll just kind of break it down to what the OKRs actually are. So we look at objectives, we look at key results, and we look at strategies and systems and or solutions, right? So the objectives themselves, like those are your big goals, right? And that it takes a little bit of prioritization, as we kind of get into this, we'll talk more in depth about objectives, but identifying what's going to have the biggest return on your investment, whether that's time or money or energy or both, all of the above, whatever. We want to understand like what's going to have the biggest ROI, and then what's also going to have at that point kind of the biggest bang for your buck, and what's the lowest hanging fruit, right? Again, like what can you attack and kind of make plan for immediately rather than kind of waiting for a long-term plan or long-term results. Like what's going to bring return the fastest from that perspective. So we look at efficiency, we look at efficacy, and then we look at the strategies and systems, we look at the key results. So when we have an objective, when we have a goal, we really have to understand, what we want to get out of that first and foremost. And I think a lot of people start the goal making process with this idea in mind, and they have a concept, and they kind of want to work towards something, but they don't identify what success actually is from that standpoint. And furthermore, they don't identify whether that level of success is reasonable based on, their lifestyle constraints or their timeline, their level of urgency, their abilities, sometimes even. So we have to identify how we define success. And then we also have to define if that success or that level of success is actually reasonable. And if it's not, we might have to redefine some things. If it is, then we kind of have to define, a timeline to kind of go after that and have that, personified through. And then we get into the actual strategies and systems that we're going to utilize to get there, right? So we have to start breaking down what we need to do from an actionable standpoint to achieve those key results. And that can be anything from the actions themselves to talking about the frequency with which we act, and the order of operations in which we act, right? So there's a few different things that we'll get into with that. Again, why OKRs? And these are similar to like if you guys have done KPIs or SMART goals or anything of that nature, it's a very similar process. But OKRs, essentially, they increase the focus and prioritization of what you're doing, right? So again, you can look at every action and everything you do within your day and see if that's moving you closer to that goal or further away, right? And if it's not moving you closer because it is taking time, it's essentially moving you further away. There's very few neutral actions that you're probably going to be doing throughout the day, weeks, months, whatever. And then we're going to be creating landmarks, right? So again, markers of success. So identifying proxies, that'll kind of tell us that we're moving in the right direction from that perspective. Similar to what you would do with a training client, right? If somebody has a 50-pound weight loss goal, like you've got markers along the way based on body weight or body composition or performance-based metrics or lifestyle metrics that will be indicators of you moving in the right direction towards these things or not. And I think, again, that's what we have to identify here with this as well. And then identifying and implementing the right systems, because again, there are no shortage of systems, whether we're talking about, training-based systems, or we're talking about business-based systems and back-end work from an administrative perspective, whatever. There's no shortage of systems in any arena. We want to make sure that you're actually implementing the ones that are going to, again, be contextually applicable to you and what you're trying to do. So the right ones, the appropriate ones for you, again, not as a global definition. Anything to add there, Matt?
No, sir.
Oh, you looked like you're itching to talk.
Oh, no.
I was going to let you.
No, you got this one. You got this one down.
Matt's like, I don't know. I talked about a radius and ulnas on Monday. I'm burnt out for the week. So getting into objectives, again, we're going to talk a little bit deeper on all three of these, but the objectives is where we start. And these are going to be very conceptual. They're going to be your big rocks. And they're the biggest goals, and again, they might be business-based, they might be health-based, they might be lifestyle-based, they might be training-based. It all depends on where you are and what you're trying to accomplish personally. And when you're looking at this from a client point of view, same thing with your clients, what they're trying to accomplish, what their constraints are, and how you can make the most impact within their lives, right? So these can be professional goals centered around financial outcomes, growth, education, etc. And they will be, again, they'll be your North Star, right? So everything that you're working towards and all the strategies and systems that you're using should be pointing you in that direction. It should be moving the needle closer to the goal. If it's not, it needs to be reevaluated. So you can use these as an internal audit system as well. These can also be personal goals focused towards things like, again, quality of life, right? So you might be looking at saving money for a house or a car or school or whatever, taking more vacations, starting a family, paying off debt. Again, there's a lot of things financially that might fit into this as well. So again, that's a very empirical marker. We talked about that a little bit through the business planning section. The great thing about, again, financial based goals is there's nothing more measurable, right? Immediately if you're moving in the right direction. It's not qualitative. You don't need a proxy. You literally just need to be able to, count and make sure that you're moving in the right direction. You're making the money you need to make. You're saving the money you need to make, et cetera. So again, as we're kind of going through this, the biggest thing that everybody should probably keep in mind, there's no wrong answers. Everybody on this call, everybody in the group watching this later will probably have different objectives as they kind of go through the OKR process. There might be some similar because, again, you're in the same demographic, you're a bunch of coaches, but you should have some individualization there based on your need, especially when we start breaking down the key results, which we'll talk about next, because that's where we all have a different definition of success within all of these things based on our own preferences, our own biases, and our own experience. So again, if we have objectives and we're going through this, we also need to make sure that these objectives don't conflict with one another, right? You can't play both sides. You can't, have your cake and eat it too at that point. You need to make sure that all of your objectives are heading in the right direction, right? That they're all going to be moving you forward, right? They're not going to be dedicating your time in opposite directions or conflicting with one another or compromising one another from that perspective, right? It's like if we have a training client and, they want to, essentially, I'm trying to think of they want to, essentially enter a powerlifting meet in 16 weeks and start training for ultra endurance running. We're going to have trouble with that unless that person's an absolute freak of nature. That's going to be a problem for just about anybody, right? Those are going to be two goals that are both achievable goals, but probably not at the same time, right? You're not going to optimize either one of them. And again, that doesn't mean that you can't compete in a powerlifting meet and run a marathon. It just means that you're not going to be probably doing either one of them up to your full potential.
Yeah, I think that's the most important part to note on this one is that if you want to be really good at something, at a certain point, you're going to have to start specializing in it, right? So it's if you want to if you want to become really good at marketing and becoming a really good business marketer, you're going to have to spend a lot of time learning marketing strategies, working on your email funnels, working on social media campaigns, and doing stuff like that get you like super inundated in marketing, so you get really, really good at what you're doing there. It's just like training, right? If you want to if you're looking at a 12-week training cycle and you're like, you know what, I need to prioritize my chest this mesocycle, you're going to focus on it and you're going to hit it with more frequency, and you're probably going to hit it with a little bit more volume and intention than you would anything else. So that's kind of what we're looking at with the OKRs, is like you want to be able to prioritize the big rocks that are going to be the most important at that given moment in time, because the more divvied up you get with it and the more divided you are, the less you're able to focus on one specific thing and move that needle the way that you want it to move.
Yep. Could not have said it better myself. So looking at key results again, and this is where I think this is probably the most important aspect of this process in reality is obviously you have to have your objectives, you have to build systems, but neither one of those things have a lot of meaning or a lot of context without the actual key results that you're looking for, right? So once you have your objectives, we need to first identify how you determine and measure success within them, right? So, as I mentioned earlier, is it reasonable? Right? Do your goals meet your own abilities as a human being or professional? Right? These are things that we need to be objective about. We need to critically think about. We need to be truthful about to ourselves, even sometimes. What opportunities will meeting this marker bring you, and why is it important? Right? So again, define the importance and the benefit of actually going after this. What do you hope to get out of it? Even if that's like an emotional reason, right? Like that's something that I think is hard to measure. So it's usually like undervalued because of that. But I think we can probably find some actionable or some empirical proxies to kind of go through that process. So we need to focus on quantitative rather than qualitative on these, right? Because we do want things that are measurable when we go through this process. If the marker is inherently qualitative, we need to determine a proxy that quantitatively represents the qualitative variable. That's an awkward sentence, but I hope it makes sense, right? So again, this is something for me, I ran into quite a bit working in the general population, realm, right? Where I would have people who had, body composition goals, and they wanted to look a certain way. And they didn't necessarily have enough knowledge of the human body or within physiology or body composition or anything to be able to, really quantifiably describe what they wanted to do. They would just literally bring in a picture of somebody and be like, I want to look like this person.
Yeah.
And with that, I would be like, that's great. It's a great looking
super
person.
Helpful.
Yeah. But at the same time, let's identify kind of, what do you think this person's body composition is? What do you think their lean muscle mass is? What do you think their FFMI is? What do you think their height and weights actually are, right? From this perspective, because again, a picture doesn't tell us all of those things, right? That's like if you guys have ever seen like a professional bodybuilder in person, you'll realize really quickly they're all like 5'3".
Yeah.
Right. And they don't look like that on stage. Like you see stage photos of them and you don't look at that person and you're like, oh, that person's like 5'3", 230 pounds. They look massive. Right. And they are big. But at the same time, it's like we need to understand also, like, is this reasonable for that person? Right. Do we have a clear understanding of what this person, is actually made up of, right? From that perspective. So when a client comes to you with that, like that's something that we need to sit down and actually start talking about. Okay, well, it looks like that person is kind of X body composition, right? So in order for us to understand what that means, we have to assess you and figure out what your body composition is, because that's going to start giving us a plan, right? So now instead of saying we want to look like this person, or even we want to be at 12% body fat, now we can actually make a much more realistic key result of saying like, okay, we want to be at 12% body fat, but we're currently at 22% body fat. So we need to lose 10% body fat. Right now we can make this incredibly measurable and create a contrast system with it. And that is from a training perspective, worlds away from just holding up a picture and saying, I want to look like this, right? We can all agree on that probably. So again, like this will give us better, planning strategies, essentially more information for better strategies. So one of the things that, again, we kind of talk about it is, do not get stuck in the land of more or better. Like, your key result should not be, I want to make more money. It should be, I want to make X amount of money, and this is why. It shouldn't be, I want to squat more. It should be, I want to squat this much, and this is why, right? Like, don't be afraid to put numbers down, right? Just make sure, again, they're realistic. And sometimes being reasonable or realistic just has to do with the time frame that you put down with them, right? So again, make sure those things align. But we can't objectively measure more against potential gain, right? So there's a lot of cases where we want to do more, but again, like, we're looking at increasing any variable, and we're just on a simple XY axis. You can have a 2% increase, you can have a 5% increase, you can have a 150% increase, right? So if I have the potential for a 15% increase on any variable, and I increase that variable by 5%, is that a win? Maybe not, right? It's inherently more. It is an increase, but I left 10% on the table from that perspective, right? So simply getting better at something doesn't mean you're optimizing that process or those results in any way. Anybody gets better at anything just by doing it more often. Like, that's just skill acquisition, right? That doesn't mean you're actually optimizing that trait, that characteristic, or that quality, right? So again, like, these are things that we need to understand and consider when we're doing, our own OKRs, or when we're talking with clients through that intake and assessment process. So finally, we get through the key results. We have very empirical, very measurable, results in mind. Now we have to start creating strategies, and we have to start figuring out what systems are going to be the most efficient use of our time, right? So this is where we create an actual plan and working towards these objectives. First things first, we have to create urgency. If there's not a timeline in place, if somebody doesn't have a performance-based goal with an end date, or a goal that simply has a timeline, right? So again, it could be somebody has a sport competition and they know exactly when it is, and we have to build them up through that process, and then peak and taper, and they compete, right? It could be somebody wants to, get in shape for a wedding, and we know exactly when that date is, and we know we have, 50 weeks to get them there. We're a year out, and we can create a long-term plan and break it down into mesocycles or blocks or whatever you want to call them, right? So we also will have clients who don't have a timeline, and we have to create one for them, right? So time creates value, creates the value of everything, right? So we need to set both timelines and frequency for all systems and strategies, right? So again, if somebody comes to us with a strength-based goal or a weight loss goal or a body composition goal, we need to set a reasonable timeline to achieve that, because that's going to help us define the processes that we're using, right? So everything from the actual programming itself to training frequency to what they're doing on their off day to potentially nutritional information and lifestyle strategies, that phase selection, whatever, right? That allows us to then create an actual programming model for that person. Without a timeline, we can't really set frequency and intensity, volume, whatever. Those numbers don't mean anything. We're just kind of spitting them out, throwing them against the wall. So we need to do that. Again, if we're talking about this from a business perspective, right, doubling your current clientele over the time of 3 months is very different than doing so over the course of a year from a financial standpoint, right? So if you have, 5 clients and you're making, $3,000 a month on those clients, and we double that, over the course of 3 months, now at that point, you've got 9 months where you're making $6,000 per month. And maybe you even have the opportunity to double it yet again over that course of the process. Whereas if we're looking at that now, doing it over the course of a year, you've left a ton of money on the table from a gross revenue standpoint, right? If we're looking at it from that perspective. So this allows us to create better strategies from a business perspective, right? So are we creating a CRM? Are we looking at marketing tools? Are we looking at different, client retention tools and client acquisition tools? Or are we going through just like very basic passive sales techniques where you're not even necessarily asking your clients for referrals? You're just hoping somebody comes to you or sees you training them on the floor, right? So again, we need to understand what strategies are going to best serve us.
That one is going to be a really important one, because that's another thing that I've had with coaches that I used to work with when I was a manager, was that they would always be sitting there not quite sure how to work on building up a referral system from their existing clients. And then other trainers would get referrals from their clients because they would ask.
Yeah. It would be like, hey, how do I get referrals from my clients? Have you tried asking them?
Yeah. You got any friends that want to work?
Yeah. It's actually an amazing process.
It was really funny though, because I had another trainer who was friends with literally everybody's clients, and he would ask them for referrals because their trainers wouldn't. And he went to full time. He got to full time in like 2 weeks because he asked everybody for referrals, and they all referred their friends to him because he was the only one that asked.
I don't even know if I'd be impressed or mad about that, to be honest.
I was impressed. I was like,
no, I mean, if I was one of the other trainers.
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah, I remember we sat down and because it was one of the meetings with all the new trainers, and I was like, he just ate every single one of y'all's lunch because he doesn't have to do these meetings anymore. He's worked here for 10 days and he's doing like 60 sessions a week. What are you guys doing?
He's training your client's fiance, right?
Yep.
Like, why are you training? What is happening? Yeah. So be precise and intentional. So understand what systems you need to create standardization and automation for your business. And then again, from a training perspective, like what systems that you use that you can leverage based on the demographic and environment that you train within, right? So different systems are going to lend themselves to different training environments and different goal selections based on demographics. So again, identify what's going to be the most efficient and the most effective for what you're doing, right? So from a business perspective, automate everything you can. It'll save you time. Time is incredibly important, especially when you're running your own business and you have a short supply of that, you're very limited. And then all strategies need to be in your calendar and organized, track everything and hold yourself accountable, right? Until you don't have to anymore, until they're actual behaviors that you just utilize. Write everything down and hold yourself accountable to those things, and that's something where, if you work within a business and you've got, again, like multiple shareholders and people that you work with and peers, you guys can hold each other accountable to an extent. But if you're a sole entrepreneur, that's honestly one of the hardest things that I think a lot of people going out on their own come to grips with, is they no longer have a boss making sure that they're doing the things they need to do. And holding yourself accountable is incredibly difficult if you're not used to it.
Oh God, yeah.
And I think
completely endorsed.
I think that's a surprise for a lot of people as they go through the process. For sure.
And you think that you'll do it, but it's really so much more difficult than you ever could have thought.
Yep.
Shit happens. It's tough. Like life comes up and it's very hard. Timelines change. If you don't have your own urgency and your own accountability things, it's very hard.
And that's why it's great that we work, all of us work together, because like if I'm slacking off, Craig will be like, yo, what the fuck are you doing? And
we'll just talk shit to each other until we get shit done.
We all round robin it until we get something done.
And not even strictly from like an accountability perspective, but like I very quickly learned that like running a brick and mortar business was not interesting to me. Like I love that I get to run my own business, but I didn't want to manage. I didn't want to deal with the responsibility and of managing like an actual facility. So now I sort of pivoted and decided, all right, I'm going to pay somebody else to do that stuff. And then I get to run my business out of their facility because I no longer want to do that. And so like, I just could not stay accountable with going door to door and being like, hey, like I'm a local business, come check me out and all of that stuff. I much rather prefer to see the people in front of me who pay an open gym membership and say, hey, like, looks like you're really interested in this thing. Like, I do it too. Would you mind if we talked, or some variation of that? And it's not quite like your commercial box gym environment. So like, I'm a little bit more laid back when I do it, but I've learned very quickly that I can create my own, like, and I do it now. Like, I have 3 things that I write on a little notepad that I do that's my important things for that day. I have other things that are on the docket, but I have 3 things every day that I make sure that I get done. And moving out of the stress of like the thing that I hated made that so much easier for me to stay accountable to.
No, I think that's a really good point as well. Is like most human beings, in my experience, will inevitably just not do the things they don't enjoy doing.
Yeah.
Just completely unconsciously. Like, they'll just keep putting it off, and other things will come up. There's no one's ever short on excuses, but things simply will not get done if they're not being held accountable by something pretty strong. And I think that's where, again, like, this process, goal alignment, whatever, allows us to give context to those things, that kind of forces us to do the things and get uncomfortable in the things that we don't necessarily enjoy doing. Like marketing, like Craig mentioned, like door-to-door marketing. Nothing sounds worse to me than that.
Oh God.
Like that is absolutely brutal. That's like worse than prospecting in a gym. That's times 100. Like, that's
what absolutely is.
So it's like, those are things that like you would not do unless you were absolutely desperate to do. And there's nothing worse than being an entrepreneur and being like semi-successful.
Yeah.
Because the desperation and the urgency also leaves, because you're getting by and you've got like that little glimmer of hope that the success you have currently will like sustain you and keep growing. And you kind of forget to do the stuff that got you there. In a lot of ways, you think you're past it. And I think, that complacency is something that I think businesses, honestly, large and small, all come across at some point, where they think they've moved out of some of the processes that made them successful in the first place, and they stop doing them, and it catches up to them, and Wesley in the chat, using real pen and paper is a lifesaver. Everything digital is just something more to forget. There are studies on that, actually, that the action of actually writing things down helps reinforce things. I want to say Thinking Fast and Slow talks about that, the book.
I'm not sure which one.
But there's actual studies that have kind of determined that, the aspect of writing something down through pen and paper rather than just typing it, actually increases the chances and like that it will get done. So there's definitely something to that, I think, Wes. I don't think it's just a you thing.
To that point that you were discussing, where you're looking at trying to bridge your business to the next level and trying to keep yourself accountable, there's a really good book written on it by a Harvard business professor called Crossing the Chasm. Highly recommend that one. It's the only book. So like, one of my most successful clients is worth multiple billions of dollars. And he actually came from literally zero to multiple billions of dollars. And it's the only book that he's ever said that I would recommend to everybody to read if you are a business owner.
You're going to have people ask for that.
Yeah. Put that in the Discord.
Yeah, I will.
So that's OKRs. And again, wanted to go through them. We're not going to spend a ton of time on them. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. They are in your case study document as well. So work on your own, fill them out, practice the process. We're going to move into the actual intake aspect of things. That's probably even a little more interesting for a lot of people. But the big thing that we're looking at is identifying first, like, what are we actually trying to find out through the intake process? And the majority of us have probably worked at several, gyms in our life, or, whether they be box gyms or private training studios or boutique gyms or small businesses, whatever. And all of those places probably had some kind of intake process. And as a young coach, or as a coach in general who wasn't super invested maybe in your company, you probably got through that as quickly as possible and tried to just like start training people. I know I did when I was a young trainer in my box gym days. We had an intake, document that was 1 page long. And I used to literally just see how fast I could get through it with people. And that was like super short-sighted of me, looking back. Like now I look at the intake process as probably the tone setter for everything else that we do, right? So I'm trying to identify myself, right? Training history, lifestyle and stress, and even with stress, like lifestyle constraints, like what's going on, what's their job like, what's their family life like, what's their social life like, nutrition, and then injury and medical history, right? So with that, and training history, I would even put goal selection in there as well. That's something that we're going to talk about through the assessment as well. But I want to understand their training history and their training goals from that perspective. So injury and medical history, most people are just going to go, if you're not a DPT or work in the medical field, a simple PARQ, a physical activity readiness questionnaire, is probably going to be good enough for you as a coach. That's what most, again, box gyms use. Gets them around all the insurance liability issues and all that good stuff. So probably anyone on this call will need as well. But again, what type of data are you collecting? And this is where I look, and I should say we look at 2 different types of data, right? So we have individual data collection, and this is going to give us insight into each individual client for their respective context. And kind of form and base your individualized programming considerations. And then we're looking at aggregate data of everybody that we train, right? And that's going to give us insight into the training population and the demographic that we work with, right? And this gives us a little better understanding of why people are actually coming to us and what they're coming to us for, and then how we can actually help them, And I think that's something that, again, a lot of coaches don't pay that enough thought, right? And that goes back to our training demographic presentation probably, but are people coming to you for motivation? Are they coming to you for accountability? Are they coming to you for your expertise? Are they coming to you for sports performance, or for rehab, or for body composition, or for general health, right? Because that's going to give you a very good understanding of, again, who you're able to market to, and kind of what strategies you should probably start steering that towards from a marketing perspective, right? Even down to like the social media level, like what kind of content are you creating at that point, right? So
if your business is generated by social media,
if it is, right? But and if you're in a gym, like who's coming up to you on the floor?
Yeah.
Right. Like, why are they coming up to you? Are they seeing you actually train yourself and like, oh, that looks cool, and can I do an assessment or a kickoff or a consultation or whatever? Or are you prospecting a certain type of clientele? Like you hang around like the squat racks at your gym and you're prospecting all the strength people, or you're over on the treadmills and you're doing, kind of gait assessments and running form and stuff of that nature. Right. So again, like there's a little bit of selection bias probably to this, and that's okay. Biases aren't bad, right? They're going to be indicators of a lot of good things. Most likely. We just don't want to get stuck within them. We want to be aware of them more so than anything else. So we'll go over my intake form in a little bit. I'll go to it now. Actually, I think that, let's see, this is actually going to direct me straight to it.
Oh, it did.
Yeah, but it doesn't give me the
did the yeah.
Son of a, okay. So I'll go back to that. But yeah, that we'll do that afterwards. Boom. So we'll look at my intake afterwards, because I want to go through the admin so we can look at individualized and aggregate data and kind of get an idea of what both of those things look like. And we just use Google Forms for our intakes. It's the easiest thing to set up in my opinion, definitely, I think in our opinions.
And it's free.
And it's free. And we like to cut costs as often as we can, because overhead, we want to keep it at a minimum. We want to spend our money on other things,
and like pay ourselves.
Yeah, not programs to build out more elaborate intake forms.
Yep.
So looking at assessments, this is where we all probably get really emotional, because the assessment thought process and the concept of assessments within this industry is so convoluted. We really kind of go against the grain at this point, I think, from an assessment perspective. I'm going to share, I think, in the Discord also the presentation that we did for anybody who missed it. I think that's probably it's a longer form version of what we're going to talk about today with this. But if you're doing a standardized assessment on every client that you see, regardless of where those people are coming from and what their goal selections are, you're probably not doing due justice to any of them. Right. And I think that's something that we need to, discuss first, just as a principle. An assessment is useless if it's not directly relevant to your client's goals or the specific population you work with.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the old saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah. And you're in trouble. That if you're trying to build a house, it's going to take a long ass time. If you got a box of screws, you're in big trouble. So again, if you're working with, post-rehabilitation clients and performance athletes and weight loss clients and geriatrics, and you're using the same assessment process on all of them, you're probably not doing a great job with any of them.
Yeah.
Or you're leaving a lot of room for improvement on the table with all but maybe one of those groups, right? So again, understanding who the people you're working with are and what they want to do is going to be super important from that perspective. So assessment strategies or categories, again, we're looking at three major things here, but medical, movement, and performance are kind of the three big categories that we're looking at. Coaches like to really kind of glance over the medical aspect of things.
Surprisingly overlooked.
Which is ironic because it's the most important for real life outside of the gym, especially, right? So looking at things like resting heart rate, blood pressure, body weight, body composition, BMI, grip testing, heart rate variability, et cetera, are all things that, again, you probably don't need to do all of these things for every single person, but you do need to understand which ones are going to be the most important, right? Like if I'm looking at an overweight client who's looking to lose weight, like I am going to be looking at things like blood pressure and body weight and body composition or BMI, right?
100%.
Right. I probably don't care. I probably care about that way more than I do like 1RMs and VO2s and performance-based testing, right? Because I want to make sure that they're able to safely train. And again, the things that I'm doing are actually looking at their mortality rate rather than just their training abilities, right? Yep. So again, those are things that we're going to look at. Movement, again, like I just listed some common ones, but these are like kind of your classic movement screens of some kind. Again, FMS, FRA table testing. So you've got active assessments, you've got passive assessments. We can go into more depth on those things. And then we've got our performance-based categories where, again, we're looking at things like VO2, vertical leap, broad jump, med ball throw, different sprints, different agilities, and then 1RM lifting and testing of that, or 3RM, 5RM, whatever, testing categories from a lifting perspective. So we're generally looking at strength, force production, or capacity, with most of those things. And again, it needs to match what that person's actually trying to do. If I'm training an ultra endurance athlete, I probably don't care about 1RMs. If I'm training a power lifter, I probably don't care that much about VO2, right? Like these are things that we need to be able to pick better assessments for the people that we're working with that actually show improvements in the things they're trying to do. Like me telling Matt that his VO2 improved doesn't give him any information about whether he's getting better for his meet.
Yeah.
It's like, that's all there is to it. Like that's not a bad thing. It's just not contextually applicable, right? Same thing if I've got a marathoner who we improve their 1RM squat, like, yeah, that's not a bad thing, but I also don't know at all if that's going to translate over to performance in any way from a positive perspective, right? So again,
and you can always make the argument that there would be some sort of benefit, like eventually downstream, to having those metrics improved. But you also have to look at, this is one of the reasons why we talked earlier about the urgency and timeline of training and training goals, right? Is because if I'm 4 weeks out of a meet right now, if I were to start working on improving my VO2 max, my numbers will acutely go down, which means that even though that would have some secondary benefit to my ability to tolerate volume and get more work done, my numbers will go down. So that is not a useful assessment or useful thing for me to be working on. Just like a marathoner, right? If that marathoner is 12 weeks out of a race and you're getting their 1 rep max up, that's not going to be the best thing for them. Probably not, at least the best thing for them going into race season.
Probably just shows your training focus or your periodization plan is not necessarily where it should be,
right?
More so than anything else, right? So
that's why there's a difference between in-season and off-season training.
Yeah. So again, make sure that we want to make sure that what we're actually choosing is not just going to provide us with good information, because all of this stuff is good information. It's being able to screen and choose what's going to be the most useful information for that person, right? And I think that's where we're looking at not good or bad, but just better in every case here. So measure what matters, manage what's measured. Again, the big thing that we want to make sure that we're doing is not wasting time with things that don't relate to the client's goals.
Yep.
Because, one, no one likes their time wasted. And two, this often leads to more confusion and more doubt with your clients than anything else, right? Because if you measured something one time, again, like if I measured Matt's VO2 and it was what it was, right? But we were training for a meet and his lifting numbers went up, but his VO2 stayed the same or even went down a little bit. Now does Matt think that that's, that he failed something or we did something wrong simply because we chose to measure VO2 when we probably shouldn't have, right? And we're overlooking the positive implications of our training because we're seeing numbers going down or numbers getting worse. Or not improving, from that perspective, when the reality of it was like, that was never an important number for this pace of time at all, right? That might be something that, again, post meet going into the off season where we want to look at his conditioning a little bit. We want to look at more capacity, better recovery, things of that nature. Then we can start looking at VO2 as a metric that might be important or more important for that time frame and that goal consideration over that, over whatever blocker time period that is, right? So again, not bad information, but not always useful, right? So again, if everything is important, nothing is important. So we also don't want to assess 30 different things, because at that point we haven't prioritized things, right? So we want to think about creating non-negotiables along with additional categories like the one on the previous slides that you can draw out of when appropriate, right? So we've got different categories for, if we go back here, medical, movement, and performance, right? This might be, again, a couple active screens. I might have, the table testing might be hip extension, femoral IR, humeral IR, ER, abduction, whatever, ISA. There might be a lot of different things. I might be looking at cervical flexion and extension or dorsiflexion or whatever, right? There might be a lot of things that I'm looking at from that perspective within a category. And then with that, I'm going to draw out the things that are going to be the most applicable for that person. I might be able to narrow that down to 2 to 3 different assessments that actually matter, right? Where the others, I'm just going to put them back in the closet and, maybe pull them out for the next client that they're going to be more applicable for, right? So we want to have categories here. I'm not going to measure probably all of these things for every single client because some of them will be redundant off of one another, right? Like if I understand that somebody's resting heart rate is decreasing or somebody's blood pressure is decreasing, I can probably look at corollaries. If I'm looking at body weight and body composition, BMI, I can probably look at corollaries and not have to worry about all 3 of those. Same thing with stress testing, like grip testing or heart rate variability. I can look at corollaries and not have to measure all of those for every single person. I can choose what's going to be the most impactful or meaningful for the individual in front of me, right? Same thing. This one's way more obvious, obviously. We're going to pick things that are going to be more applicable to that person's goals, right? So there'll be a lot of individualization on performance-based things. Yep. So again, looking at, my assessment, there's a few different things that I look at from this perspective. My client demographic is mainly coaches, endurance athletes, and field sport athletes. I don't work with a lot of strength athletes. That's why we have Matt and Craig, because they work with a lot of strength athletes.
Craig, you're real.
I'm real.
Craig is real.
I even called him Craig and not Greg.
I know.
I feel like I should get a little bit of credit for that.
Are you sick?
There's a lot of ways to interpret that. So passive measurements that I would be looking at is, again, understanding just the client's general morphology, right? Like what's their height? What's their structure look like? What's their limb lengths look like, et cetera. Looking at general things like hip extension, shoulder IR, ER. Like those would be some general things that I'm looking at from a passive standpoint. And then active measurements, like again, I might look at gait, especially if I'm working with my runners. I'll be looking at walking and running, side and back and front, kind of understanding like where they might have some limitations within the actual gait cycle from a stance perspective, from a swing perspective. And then looking at body weight squat, standing toe touch, again, just looking at how their hips move, looking at how their back moves. An Apley's test for shoulder, just internal external rotation during flexion extension, a push-up to see how they manage their rib cage through scapular retraction and protraction or the lack thereof, and then overhead flexion potentially, just to see what that movement looks like and see if there's any limitations from that perspective. And all I'm looking at here is just understanding how they move so I can make better choices from an exercise selection standpoint. I'm not limiting things. I'm just trying to make better decisions. Performance is going to be task orientation. So again, if they're a runner, it's going to be something running based. If they're a field sport athlete, I'm going to be looking more at agility or power or force production. Biometrics, height, weight, resting heart rate, blood pressure are some things that I'll be looking at. If somebody has autonomic issues or the potential for those things, I might look at HRV if they're super interested in that. I just don't want them to become obsessive about it from that perspective. And then daily subjectives, again, like HRV, resting heart rate, and then subjective like readiness, soreness, scores that they'll essentially rate themselves on a daily basis, steps prior day, sleep prior night, and mood. Right. And I'll just look at those on a scale of like 1 to 5. And those are things that even though they're subjective, I can still look at long-term trends where if I'm looking at, their own like readiness and soreness scores over the course of like a 2-month period. And I see that they're going from, 2 on readiness and like 4 to 5 on soreness from at the beginning to 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 on readiness and 1 to 2 on soreness or 3 on soreness. Like I know we're moving in the right direction. They're becoming more training adapted. And that can tell me a few things about like what their next phase should look like even at that standpoint. Right. So again, these are numbers that I can take into consideration alongside their actual training data. Right. So I can look at their objective numbers and then I can look at their daily subjective scoring systems alongside one another to get a better picture of kind of where they're at and what direction we're heading in from that perspective. Maddie?
All right. My assessment, right? So we're looking at the assessment and the demographic that I am going to be working with. My assessment is powerlifters, right? So I'm not actually going to be doing much specific range of motion testing with any of my people unless there's a need to it, right? Or a need for it. So if I'm looking at somebody who is struggling to hit depth in a squat, they're not really touching their bench, their chest and bench, they're having some shoulder pain or some issues in there, or some elbow related pain from those things, and their deadlift just looks terrible, then I might touch some range of motion things, but I'm usually not going to touch any of it whatsoever, right? So the way that I'm going to look at assessing my people is I'm going to be looking at currently, we're building out a big performance battery that we'll be doing a whole lot of stuff with soon, but it's not quite done yet. So I don't want to even talk about what it's going to be, but it's going to be really cool. And nothing else like it exists. So that'll be fun. But right now, my assessment process that I'm looking at with all my clients and all the people that I take on we're looking at competition-specific movements with that at about 75 to 80% of their max for sets of 3 to 7, right? Depending on the load that person is going to use. What I want to look at is I want to see just how they're going to move in general. And I want to get a look at like a qualitative look of how their lifts look, right? So I can assess and check to see if their setup or their execution is looking good and it's looking respective of that person's individual morphology. I want to see when they start to break down and when they start to fatigue. And I want to start looking at the limiters, right? So what I mean by the limiters is this person limited in their ability to perform the movement themselves? Like, are they just not very skillful at this lift? Does this person have some sort of a deficiency where they're going to squat and their hips are going to shoot back first and they're going to stand up and they're going to round their back on the way up on the squat? Is this person cueing themselves the right way? Like, are their knees jutting way out sideways over their feet outwards, as opposed to going straight forwards and back over their toes? Like, I'm looking at these qualitative things so I can make sure that we're getting all of those things beforehand correct, right? So what I'm going to look at here is, if we're looking at a technical breakdown, there's a few things that we're going to be looking at with this, right? And particularly with the weight that we've chosen, this is going to be either somebody protecting for an injury or somebody who's not strong enough to maintain that position, right? So the first one, if it's somebody who's injured, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that PAR-Q and I'm going to take that injury history screen that we're going to look at, and I'm going to find an entry point where we're looking at building up better tolerance in that tissue to then build the range of that movement. If we're looking at somebody who has a strength deficiency, like again, the knees extending early in their squat and their deadlift means either that their bar position is not right and their setup is not the best that it could be, they're not setting up in the right stance, or they're just relatively weak and we need to work on building up more quad strength. And again, what this is going to change, this is not going to make their squat just better right away, but it's going to start being an easy thing that we can use to start pushing that number up, because what I can tell is I can see if their quads are relatively weak compared to the rest of the way that they're going to move. Right? Same thing with an early elbow flare in a bench, right? Their grip width might not be appropriate, or their chest just might not be strong enough to support the load that we're looking for. So I need to figure out what we can do to see how we can look at training this. And that's why I'm talking about the test that I'm going to be looking at with my people, right? If I'm looking at these things, those are going to give me enough information to be able to see if there's anything else that I need to be able to do to train them through a longer range of motion in accessory movements, in a slightly different stance, in a slightly different position, to give them the variation that they might need to build up the requisite tissues to push those competition lifts further ahead. Right? Like if I have somebody with an incredibly high arch and a relatively close grip bench, I know that doing things like dips are going to be a great accessory movement for them. If I have somebody who has a relatively high, low arch, and they've got a wider grip bench, machine pressing, like machine incline pressing and dumbbell benching and flat dumbbell benching and incline dumbbell benching are going to be fantastic movements for them. Right? So I just need to be able to look at the person and assess the person's movement through the competition specific lifts to then kind of see what I can look at training through longer range of motion and building up on top of from there. Can we go to the next slide, please, Kyle? Right. So in addition to this, one of the things, like I said, I'm going to be looking at all of these additional things as needed in respect to that person's individual goal. Right. So if they're interested in losing weight, this is not even my slide anymore. I'm just on a roll.
You know how to train Gen. I'm just gonna let you go with it, man.
I do train Gen Pop people as well in person, right? So this is one of those things where, like, I want to look at doing any of these additional assessments with people as needed, right? So if they're interested in losing weight, I want to pick the 1 to 2 most relevant assessments to that particular person with the tools that I have available at my facility to facilitate that progress, right? And make sure that I'm tracking that appropriately. Usually what I'm going to pick is something like circumference measurements and body weight. Right? If they're interested in getting stronger, I'm going to ask them to pick a certain area where they would like to get stronger, so we can continuously assess that every individual session that we're looking at building. If I have somebody who wants to, quote unquote, move better or feel better, I have to find out and I have to ask them a bunch of questions about where they don't normally feel good and where they can feel better, right? Like, what particular areas in your day do you just not feel very good, and where do you not feel like you move very well? Oh, well, I don't feel like I move very well when I'm trying to play basketball with my son. Okay, cool. That gives us something that we can begin to work on, because now I know that their cardiovascular capacity is probably just not very good. We need to work on a little bit more elastic endurance and explosive strength. And now I know what we can start prioritizing to start working on building up their capacity there.
I feel like that was a subtle dig at my
Oh no, you dunk on your kid all the time. It is not definitely a dig at you. Most definitely not.
The amount of embarrassment I've had when I've had to tell, when people are like, "How'd you hurt your knee?" And I was like, "Playing basketball with my kid."
No. You didn't hurt your knee playing basketball. You hurt your knee because of TikTok.
It's also true. I did. Oh, that's even more embarrassing.
It was Kyle's first ever TikTok post, and he just blew his knee out.
It wasn't the dunk that I posted though, which was good.
I know. but it was immediately afterwards.
Yeah, that one I was like, I had to go sit on the bench. I was donezo.
But we did send out an email on Sunday talking about the TikTok curse. That also happened to Jeb. So Jeb Stewart Johnston, he started on TikTok. He started posting training stuff. And then like the second training reel that he posted, he jacked up his back. And it happened to Dean too, because Dean made one TikTok video and then immediately jacked up his elbow. Like I am the only one that is surviving so far, knock on wood. And I'm like the most delicate out of the three of us, or the four of us.
Man, you don't want to.
I got my pec tear out of the way in March. I'm good.
You don't want to tempt the TikTok gods with this.
No.
It's a hell spawn. It's terrible. They'll come after you. Yeah, I mean, so I think again, this just goes back to the main concept that we've been talking about through the entire assessment process is pick the things that actually matter the most, right? Make sure that you're measuring the things that matter the most. You don't need to measure everything, and you probably shouldn't measure everything, right? Because again, like a lot of it's not going to be relevant, and measuring things that aren't relevant leads to, again, just to reiterate, one, a lot of wasted time, which could be frustrating for your clients and yourself. And two, potentially like false negatives or false positives and frustration through the training process for your clients if they're not seeing those metrics actually improve, even if they don't matter. Because if you measure them, they're going to assume it's important, and that's what you're inferring as a coach, right? So if we're measuring things, they're going to assume that those things are important. And then if you never measure them again because you just do an assessment once, or if they fail to improve, those markers don't improve, your clients are going to wonder why. And that's going to lead to awkward conversations both directions, right? So again, be smart about it. Additional factors to consider, again, why the Hawthorne effect is something that we kind of talk about a little bit, that just kind of identifies why measuring things kind of also matters from a psychological perspective, where based on research, based on studies, behavior changes when people have an awareness that they're going to be observed and or measured or assessed. They change their actual behaviors to start, again, wanting to improve those things. Like I see this when I'm working with, if you guys have ever assessed another coach, or whether it was a client-based perspective or just like practicing at work or whatever, people who are hyper aware of what that measurement should be identifying will alter their movement to pass an assessment.
Yeah.
Right. Like when I do remote coaching assessments and have people send in videos, my athletes who don't necessarily understand like what I'm looking for just move. When I do it with coaches, like I'll see like ultra slow motion body weight squats because everybody's trying to be more vertical in their torsos and let their knees slide forward, have forward knee translation and get good dorsiflexion. And it's a very conscious effort that I know is not real. Like they're trying to create a picture of something, right? So again, from a training perspective, if you're assessing your clients regularly, maybe their training attendance improves. Maybe their lifestyle and nutrition improves. Maybe their intention within the sessions themselves improves because they know they're going to be assessed. They know they're going to be tested with that, right? So again, these things can also add a level of accountability. DISC considerations, again, that's something that is in the pre-recorded material, but we're looking at behavioral archetypes. So understanding, again, if somebody has a heightened threat response going into the assessment process, as a lot of general population people do, but also just people who generally have more anxiety, you will see an impact in physiological markers and biometrics, right? You'll see increased resting heart rate, blood pressure, movement and aerobic output might be compromised somewhat. So you're going to get false negatives or false positives potentially even within those medical or diagnostic-based, performance-based outputs, right? So again, these are things that we need to know as we go through this process. Keep the movement direct and applicable. Do you need to know how passive IR, the passive IR of the femurs, or can you just watch somebody squat, right? Can you even accurately measure femoral IR? Do you have a goniometer? Are you using coach's eye? Are you looking at the pelvis and the femur's movement in relation to the pelvis? Because most of the people that I see measuring table testing, internal and external rotation of humerus and femurs, like I'm watching a lot of rib cage movement, a lot of humeral glide. I'm watching a lot of pelvis movement.
It's great.
It's not actually femoral rotation that we're seeing, right? You know, so again,
my favorite thing to watch is people talking about how like their clients like internal rotation improved. I'm like, no, that person just adducted their femur more, and there's no more internal rotation happening here.
Yeah, or you're just watching literally like the head of their shoulder like lift up 3 inches off a table to facilitate more internal rotation, right? Like that's the other aspect of that is like, how do you look at that and say, oh, you've got 27 degrees? You don't know, right? It's the same thing. Like if you're trying to assess like somebody like an anterior or posterior pelvic tilt, like you can, you know, look at the actual aspect of the pelvis and probably see what's happening with the lumbar spine, et cetera. But it's like, you can't look at like that and understand like sacral nutation or counter nutation or internal external rotation of iliums and to what degrees. Like we're talking millimeters of movement. Right. So even when we look at like a pelvis and we're looking at like an anterior pelvic tilt, that's just lumbar lordosis. You don't know what the pelvis is actually doing. Like that's not necessarily pelvic ER, right? From an actual ilium standpoint, right? You know, so again, like these are things that I'm not even sure that we can eyeball those things accurately enough to really use them that much. And I think, you know, I've come to the conclusion for myself, at least, that I'm better off just looking at people moving.
Yeah.
More so than anything else. And I get better training applications based on those things. Right. So again, things to consider. It's fun to get lost in the weeds, but it's not always useful from that perspective. Oh, somebody just dropped off the call. I'm sorry if I offended somebody. Oh, it was Wesley. I don't think I offended him.
Oh no, Wesley's fine.
I was like, damn, who did I make
Wesley's
mad?
been through these like 6 times. He's good.
I was like, oh man, I made somebody mad. So again, how do you make this more efficient? From a remote perspective, have the client submit movement videos beforehand that you can then give them feedback on during the consultation. So if anyone who schedules a consultation with me automatically gets kicked back a list of videos that I want them to submit, and my intake form. And if they don't do those things prior to their scheduled consultation, I cancel it. And we reschedule until they get those things back to me. Because I don't want to spend 15, 20 minutes of our 30-minute call trying to coach them through movements. That's a waste of my time. We don't get to actually talk about training and strategies for training. In person, eliminate anything that doesn't matter. Focus on the things that do, right? If a client is overweight and doesn't move well, they probably don't move well because they're overweight. It's not rocket science. Like they will not move better until they lose weight. Losing weight is the biggest rock with the highest return on investment, right? So again, having them lay on the ground, going through a bunch of table tests, going through a bunch of movement screens probably isn't going to tell you anything that you don't already know or can at least reasonably assume, right? If the client has compensatory movement strategies, but no discomfort or pain, does it even matter based on their goal selections? It might not, right? It might matter. It might not. So we have to make better decisions based on that aspect of things. We need to be able to understand based on their goal, are we leaking efficiency, or is that just self-organization and actually improving efficiency based on what we're seeing, right? Like we see this a lot in strength sports where you see people with different morphologies leveraging different strategies all the time, completely pain-free. Like squats don't look the same, right? They meet the same like depth parameters, but nothing else necessarily looks the same. Different levels of bench press arch, sumos versus
conventional.
Conventional. I was like,
real deadlifts,
yeah.
Craig, I pulled more than you too, so
different deadlifting strategies. Again, like all of these things, people are going to self-select into strategies that fit their morphology and make it more efficient for them to train more so than anything else. Doesn't mean that it's bad or good or even a problem in any way. Right. So again, these are things that we have to understand as a coach, especially when we have very limited time working with the people that we work with. Like, are we fixing problems that aren't there? Are we creating problems that aren't actually there in a lot of cases? Cool. So Q&A, I'm going to pull up my assessment really quick. If anybody wants to,
that'd be awesome.
If you and Craig want to talk a little bit and fill that space.
I do have a slight rant about one of the things
up.
you just talked about, where people that are self-selecting into the stance of movements that they want to be able to do. That's not happening anymore. Now people are self-selecting into the thing that they think is going to be easier. And if you watch a bunch of these people do sumo deadlifts on Instagram, it's like, you should just conventional deadlift. Your shins are vertical and your chest is like parallel to the ground. Do a conventional deadlift. You're in a position and you're just making it worse for both ends. It's now harder off the floor and harder to lock out, as opposed to being easier in one of those locations. So you're just making it harder for absolutely no reason, because everybody says, oh, sumo's cheating and it's easier. Shut up and do the thing that makes it easier for you. Rant over.
I was talking more. I was transitioning out of strength sports into real people.
I know, but it's just one of those things where you like, you mentioned that, and I was like, this makes me very angry.
You're just angry in general, man.
That's accurate.
So again, like, this is my intake form. This is what gets sent to people. It's fairly long. Mine's long for a reason. One, I want a lot of information. Two, it's a filter within the process. So again, like, I've got 4 sections. So I've got an actual training history, training goals. I've got a lifestyle. I've got a nutrition and supplementation. And then I've got a medical, which is just a PARQ, right? So lots of questions. It takes people usually like 20 to 30 minutes to fill the whole thing out, which is fine, because it lets me know, again, how much time they're willing to dedicate into this. Because I'll have some people who write really long answers, as you'll see, and some people who write very short answers, or one sentence, a couple words, whatever. This has been filled out by a lot of coaches, because I always post this into the actual Discords or Slacks in the past. So a lot of the answers are goofy, because coaches have just been trying to fill it out to see what the questions were. So keep that in mind, but You'll get the concept. So as I go into responses, I can look at a summary, which is going to give me aggregate data, and I can look at individual, which is going to give me individual data, right? So if I go through this, again, I can look at aggregate data here and understand, like, again, how long people have been thinking about training, right? So again, 2 months is going to be by and far my largest marker, right? I can look at why people are coming to me, right? Strength, body composition, mobility. I'm a mobility coach, Matt.
Honestly,
and sports specific performance are going to be kind of the top 4, right? These are why people are kind of coming to train with me. That's why they're choosing me from that perspective. And again, and then I have the individual responses, which are the please explains, right? So you'll see kind of, again, real answers versus not real answers. But like this person, again, like ton of stuff here, right? Like, look at that. We got, that's a very long answer. I forgot about that one, but we got left elbow, left shoulder. We got reoccurring lower thoracic back spasms. We got primary goals. We got aesthetics. So again, like, these are things where I can kind of identify what people are coming to me for specifically. And then from an aggregate perspective, got another aggregate answer here with lifestyle goals. And again, increased mental clarity, improved sleep, nutrition, happiness, increased energy. Those are going to be, again, the big rocks for a lot of my people. And then I've got my individual answers. Same thing here, expertise, far and away. That's why people are coming to me. And then I've got some other things that are going to break down into more, like, again, pie charts rather than line graphs, where I can understand, like, again, how many days, like, what training frequency is going to look like for most of my people. So most of my people train 5 to 7 days a week. So they are trained individuals. There are people who enjoy training. They probably have a little higher training age, right? I can kind of gather that through that process. They're coming to me with, by and large, an overall starting fitness level of, subjectively 6 to 7. and they want to be a 9 to 10. So again, I'm working with a trained population rather than people who are coming to me with like a 1 to 2 that want to be like a 4 to 5, right? From that perspective. The majority of my population, again, about right at 2/3, has worked with a trainer before, right? So I want to know what their experience was. I know they paid for training in the past, which is a big plus for me. But I also know that if they're not working with their past trainer, that maybe they had a negative experience within that process. Maybe they just moved. I don't know. Maybe they're doing remote for the first time, right? They've only done in person. So again, this gives me a little bit of information based on aggregate. And then I've got my individualized. Oh boy, that's not what I wanted. I side shifted. My stuff's loading super slow too. I don't know why.
As soon as I share my screen on Zoom, it does the exact same thing to me.
Yeah, it's too much data here. But yeah, so you guys can kind of see from an aggregate perspective. Again, I can get some pretty decent information, but then I can also break down everybody individually as I go through this process too, and look at their stuff. And this is what I would be looking at more so within an actual consultation, right? So I think we all get the picture there. I'll post the actual assessment within the Discord if anybody wants to look at it, see the questions I ask. Obviously, in the case study document, we have more of a general template that you're going to be able to post, like 10 to 15 questions on. But if you want to make your own and you want it to be a little longer format, Google Forms is super easy to use and a great way to go about that process. Very easy to just send links to people as well. Rather than like PDF docs or something of that nature, in my opinion, and experience. So
one of the other reasons why, because this is one of the questions that we've always gotten asked, or not, we haven't gotten asked this question, but it's one of the things that I always want to talk about with people is like, we made all of our stuff. And I brought this up in the beginning of the case study call when we went over it and introduced it originally. We made all of our stuff really basic on purpose because we don't want you stealing our things. We want you putting your own stuff together and making stuff that works really well for the demographics that you guys are working with. And we understand that our demographic is not going to be the same as yours. And it's most likely not going to be the same as yours. So what we'd like you guys to be able to do is get really, really good at using and utilizing the peers that you guys have in this program to figure out the best things that you guys can do and put together the best resources that you can for them. Right. So if you guys are looking at building your own intake, we would love for you guys to be able to start having discussions with people in the Discord about what questions you guys would be asking. Post your intakes to the Discord as well so people can talk about them. Yeah. Don't just steal ours. That's why we put together a shitty one.
Yeah, that's also why we want you to create your own model and not use ours or use, again, your favorite influencers or whatever. I'm assuming we're probably not your favorite influencers because we're all pretty shitty at that. But yeah, it's definitely something where we want to help you guys create your own stuff based on your experience and your goals from a professional perspective, right? So does anybody have any questions about that stuff, about the intake, the assessment process, OKRs, or anything else in general? Matt's TikTok experience. He's got a lot of
been very positive so far.
18-year-old powerlifters that love watching him lift big weights.
I had a person tell me the other day, they blocked me about this, so I can't post the comments about it. But they DM'd me and asked me what bar I was using for my 730-pound deadlift. And I said it was the Kabuki deadlift bar. And they DM'd me and said that it's deadlift bar, so it doesn't count. And I was like, bro, you pull 315 with straps.
Oh,
shut up.
You did it to him.
Well, yeah, you pull 315 with straps and you're going to talk shit about my deadlift not being real. Like I'm using calibrated plates like a competition bar.
Yeah, so Matt's TikTok experience is much like his Instagram experience where he just trolls people.
I'm just like, why are you talking so much shit when you're so small and weak? Like, what are you talking about?
Okay. It's probably time for us to cut this off. If nobody else has any real questions, I'm gonna give all the people on the call, not just Matt, a little 10-second countdown. And
sure, I'll chime in. I didn't want to write.
Thank you, Frankie.
Sorry, it's a little bit too long-winded to type out, so I figured I'd talk into this. Going back to your filtering system about the videos, they have to send your videos before you flirt with the idea of taking them. Do you cap it at just the videos, or do you keep it with the bar Q? Like, how many layers of that is there? Because that's kind of
it's videos and intake form. It's the
Okay.
whole shebang. Like, they need to fill this entire thing out and then send me usually it's anywhere between 3 to 6 videos. And again, it's like stuff they can do in their living room. It's not even gym specific for me. Like, Matt's is going to be a little different because he needs to see gym lifts.
Right.
Mine is going to be like, you can do it in your pajamas in your living room if you want to. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I just kind of want to get a better idea of some of those movement things. So, but it's the whole intake and the videos. If I don't have that information going into the consultation, that means I then have to ask all that information in the consultation, which is a huge waste of time.
Yep.
Because I want to use the consultation process to, again, look over the intake form ahead of time, formulate follow-up questions based on the information that I've then received, right? So I want to start talking about solutions within the consultation and not just talk about problems, right? The intake form's for problems. The consultation is for me working with that person to help make a plan to kind of solve some of these issues that they want to work on. But if I have to ask them all the questions within that, I don't really have enough time to do both.
Yeah.
So it's the whole thing for me.
Yeah. For me, it's the intake form first, and then all of the stuff after.
Yeah.
I'm variable. I change quite a bit based on who's in front of me, honestly. Like I'm in, like I've done both. I've actually really liked the way that when I first went through the mentorship and Kyle shared the way that he did this, I tried very hard to do it like that for my in-person people, and they just didn't respond to it. Not nearly the way that I would have expected or hoped. So I've audibled quite a bit, and now, I mean, I don't have a concrete way that I do it, especially because I get a lot of walk-ins too, and that makes a difference.
That's also the difference between in-person and remote.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So very big clarification there.
Yes.
So I've just gotten flexible with it, and I try to do it that way. It just doesn't always work out.
Yeah.
But what do you do? Like, have you found
So I mean, I still have a general. So what I first did was my in-person intake form, I had to cut about in half from what I initially came up with. And that's just in general. And now I have a pretty good idea of what everything is on it. So I will ask a lot of the important things that I know that I want to know, and sort of base a quick assessment on that, assuming that I'm doing it right now. What I try to do is push everyone to schedule an assessment with me at a different time for whatever reason. So I give them a rundown of the gym, how I actually deliver the coaching. We'll do a tour if that's something that someone's brand new, and then I'll try to reschedule them. Now, if I can get a chance to reschedule them, I will say, hey, please fill out my intake form, get me anything that you need. If it's and then when they come back for their actual assessment orientation, I have whatever it is, I will then use everything that they've given me in the assessment, or I'm sorry, in the intake form, and ask either follow-up questions or clarification questions. Or like Kyle said, that time is spent trying to brainstorm solutions with them or share what I think is their best chance at success. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how I navigate it. A lot of it is on the fly for me, especially in person. So I've had to be, flexible a little bit, but I try to have that system for the way that I do it.
Got it. Thank you, Wes.
Yeah, I would say even back in my in-person days, one of the things I started doing after realizing that most of the people that were coming in for consultations really wanted a training session from me.
Right.
And for me, I inherently wanted to give them what they wanted because that was kind of my chance to validate myself and build rapport and be able to kind of see where they were at. But I also knew that I needed the information on the intake form. So I would still send them the intake form ahead of time. And I would say, similar to Craig, I probably had like a 50% rate at best of them actually filling it out ahead of time. But for the people who did, we ended up getting to spend, probably the first 15 minutes of the assessment through the consultation, going through an assessment. And then they got like 30 to 40 minutes of like a sample training session based on what I was seeing, right? Where I could, again, use that assessment, use their goals, create better exercise selections, create some circuits to go through, whatever. But I would make it known, like I would shoot them an email and say, hey, just want to go ahead and, send you this information beforehand. If you do take the time, the 10 minutes or so to fill it out and get it back to me before the actual consultation, we'll get to do more movement within the consultation. Like I would kind of, again, try to dangle the carrot a little bit from that perspective. I did, obviously there were some outliers where I did have some people who just literally wanted to talk about the intake the entirety of the hour and not work out at all. Yeah. And, so that was the other end of the spectrum. But for the people who maybe didn't perceive exercise the same way I perceive exercise, and they just wanted to get a good sweat in and be challenged and whatever, kind of, again, typical gym pop archetype sometimes. I wanted to be able to give that to them because that was their expectation, and me being able to get what I wanted and give them what they wanted required me to send that intake out first.
So to kind of go on with that one as well, before I left my box gym, that was one of the best changes that they made it when you would set an appointment for somebody to do an assessment, it would automatically send them the consultation and they could fill out everything ahead of time. It made it so much easier because if you had somebody that filled out their consultation ahead of time, you also knew that that person was much more serious about doing everything else that they would want to do. So you would come in and be able to get really detailed into talking about all of the stuff that they wanted to talk about. They'd have a plan when they would come in for it, and they would know what the assessment was for. Because a lot of times with people, they didn't understand that the assessment was just going to be an area where we would sit down and get to know each other and not do something. So then when they started doing this gave us the ability to just be like, cool, well, I'm just going to throw you on the movement screen that I have to do to check this box, and then we're going to go like do stuff. And it made everybody close more sessions or more appointments with people. It was such a good change that they did. And it was one of the only things that they changed that I thought was very positive. Yeah. And they did a whole bunch of other dumb stuff and like made it not worth it anymore. So I was like, well, you gave us one good thing, then you take it away.
That's what happens sometimes. No, that's a great question. I do think, again, and this is where I think sometimes it surprises people, other times it doesn't. But like Matt, Craig, and I, we don't all have the same processes based on the people that we work with and in the context within we work, right? And that's something that, based on the conversations we've had within these calls, shouldn't be surprising, but I think always kind of is for a lot of people, just because we work under the same umbrella, but we work with different populations. And Craig still works with a lot of people in person, so his processes are inherently going to be different than Matt and I's from a remote standpoint as well. And again, my consultations are usually 30 minutes. I rarely spend an hour with somebody unless I know they're going to train and I want to maximize that time. But if it's just a standard consultation, like it's 30 minutes. So I also have to, that creates urgency within my systems, which leads to me needing to have better preparation and more information going into it ahead of time also. So awesome. Cool. I will get this all up on Discord. You guys have been great. No guest speaker this week, so we will see you on Monday. Have a great rest of the week. Later, everybody.